Hi, my name is Tom Ollerton, and this is the Shiny New Object podcast. This is a podcast about new marketing technology, and every week I speak to someone interesting, inspirational, influential, or someone that I just like. And generally it's all of those things, and this week it's no different. I have Lawrence Webber, who's the managing partner at Karmarama, but also a director at Innovation Social. Hi, Lawrence.
Hello, Tom.
Can you tell the audience who may not know who you are, if they work in any way in innovation in London, they will know exactly who you are, but there may well be some people in the industry who don't know who you are. So can you just let people know who you are and what you do?
I definitely can do. So I guess I do a couple of things at Karmarama. One is to look after our relationship with all of the big tech platforms, so Google, Twitter, Facebook, their creative teams, find out what they're planning, find out how we can use those things for creative and commercial advantage for our clients. And then at the other end of the spectrum is kind of to do the same thing around emerging technology, but to do it with the startup community. So I had the pleasure of working with Unilever on their Unilever Foundry kind of startup development program for a long time, and we've used that model of corporates working with startups a lot with other clients. I'm generally the guy in the office that will get very excited about new technology and help other people to get excited about it, and hopefully get our clients to get excited about it too. I have for about a year run something along with our CTO called Creative Futures, which is an innovation practice which broadly tries to do the same thing, inspire people about technology, but then get them to build MVPs or partner with startups that have already built an MVP to kind of to get things moving more quickly in corporates. So that's the day job, and then outside of that, I do a bunch of other things, bit of speaking, bit of writing. My biggest kind of extracurricular thing is being a director of something called Innovation Social, which is a ragbag group of about 200 agency, startup, VC and platform people that frankly just like to have a beer and talk about new technology. And once a year we put on our best suits and run a conference, which loses money but makes us new friends. So that's me.
Do you know, the last Innovation Social I went to, and I've been to a lot, it just terrified me, the amount of money that had been collectively spent on trainers.
Yeah,
in the room.
Yeah. There's a lot of money spent on trainers and Fitbits.
Yeah.
Between those two things.
But if you, dear listener, work in innovation or have it like innovation leaning, then you should definitely check out Innovation Social. I think I had a really interesting moment when I went to the first one, and Nadja Powell, who runs it with you.
Yeah, founded, in case she's listening, otherwise we'll get letters of complaint.
Yeah, she said that that everyone's here to share everything, that in innovation it's not really a competitive space. To steal someone else's innovation client would be the most remarkable of steals known to man.
It would be, mostly because very few of them have any money.
Yeah, so exactly.
You'd be stealing poor people of other agencies. But yeah, no, I think I once described it as kind of a support group for innovation people, just because we all put our differences and rivalries and the fact that we might be pitching against each other the next day aside, just to try and learn stuff from each other. So it's a great group, and look it up on the Twitter and things, and we'd very happily have you.
But you rarely pitch against someone for innovation. I don't think I've ever done a competitive innovation brief at an agency, or is that what happens at the lofty heights of Karmarama?
Where the lofty heights of Karmarama, I guess we are, as people who know about Karmarama listening to this will know, we were bought by Accenture Interactive 18 months or so ago, and they have a more industrialised version of innovation that they often pitch against other people. So that's been one of the interesting things about becoming part of a consulting group, is their approach to innovation is kind of more focused on kind of, I guess, bigger deals and the build of things. So yeah, they do routinely pitch for innovation type projects against people. But I think that was notwithstanding, the kind of community of innovation people are still very open and like to share ideas, because essentially we're all very curious people. And the ethos of Innovation Social from the start was we're trying to create a market for these types of projects, and we're only going to do that if we all work together. So it's classic kind of, a new market or product being created often gets created by rivals, initially kind of banding together to create that market, and then when it matures, then everyone starts to stab each other in the back and push each other downstairs and things. I haven't got to that stage yet. You look worried, but it's fine.
So we'll come back to Innovation Social later, but I've known you for a long time, but I knew nothing about what you actually did apart from Innovation Social. So when you say you look after the big tech platforms, what do you mean? Like, is because Karmarama have like a really weighty spend with Facebook that you get inside the golden circle and work out what's coming up next, or are you like sniffing around for crumbs like I was?
So it's more the kind of creative agency teams. So it's the creative agency teams within Google and Facebook and Twitter who are doing a good job these days. Actually, like maybe 6-7 years ago when I first arrived at Karmarama, those teams were less well developed, but these days the big tech platforms are interested in helping creative agencies do better work. You're completely right that one of the things that they will need to see from agencies is spend, and so therefore the clients they can help you with it are selected based on their media spend. But they've got some good kind of creative people in those places now. A lot of whom seem to hoover up from agencies. So there's a lot of my ex-colleagues currently treading the boards at Google and Facebook.
And how do you feel about those people?
How do I feel about those people?
It came out wrong.
How do I feel about those people?
No, it's a terrible question. I'm saying what I mean is you see brilliant people go to the platforms and you think, right, okay, well, what are they actually selling? The limit of their sales has to be the products available on those platforms.
Yeah. So I think it's a good question. So I think they can, was my point of view, is they can no longer sell bespoke creativity because they haven't got a completely blank canvas like a creative in an agency will have. My view of what they do is they help you and your agency and your client get the best out of the platform and those techniques. So what's interesting, I think, is a lot of those people are actually, if you dig deep into their kind of careers and their skills, are actually strategists. So they're more about the efficient use of those platforms and where they fit into a media plan rather than blue sky kind of creative thinking, because there's only a certain amount of stuff that they can sell. So it's about best practice and technique and how to be creative within those platforms, but which are important platforms.
And so where do you stand on the way that Facebook, for example, are talking about the length of video, the optimal length of video? I talk to clients and they're saying, well, Facebook say that the perfect video is 2.78 seconds long, which just is the most ridiculous thing. It's great for Facebook because they can sell lots more videos. So how do you deal with that kind of advice from the big platforms, and how do you steer your clients in the right direction?
So I think you've got to listen to that advice, and then you've got to have the courage of your conviction to say to clients, we understand what the best practice is from Facebook. We understand that the stats show that you get attention drop off after a certain amount of time, that you need to deliver your core message in the first few seconds, and some of those things we regard as being kind of golden rules that you can't break, and then the rest of it is about if you tick those boxes and you change the way you tell stories, to use a very overused word in the advertising community, then you can carry on producing the type of creative you want. I think what is uncomfortable for creative agencies and creatives is there are some realities about making content for Facebook on a mobile screen, that are just fact, that aren't. It's not like making TV. You can't do long, slow, panning build-ups with emotional music that make you want to cry by the end of 90-second ads when you're competing with your mate's baby pictures or your daughter's football team scoring on a video that your mate's just posted. It's a different medium. So I think clients are being given very specific advice by all of the platforms, and an agency's job is still to understand which ones they should be on and to try and create content that works across the majority of those platforms without perverting creativity completely.
And so let's jump across to the other part of the job, which is working with startups. Now, when I started out as an innovation person, I was very much looking to Unilever Foundry going, wow, my God, they seem to have that all sorted. You know, there was like trials, there was events, there was mentoring, there was like a fund, even had a website with icons on it and stuff. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And I didn't realise how much of that had come from Karmarama. So how did that work? How much of that was spin? Like you seem to have achieved more than any other agency in terms of a partnership with a large corporate.
Yeah, So to start with some fundamentals. So Unilever Foundry was already a thing that Unilever had started. It's very, very early days, and we came in to do two jobs. One was to do the kind of PR and comms around it, so to tell the strongest story possible, so that external people would understand that Unilever were progressive. People internal to Unilever understood that Unilever had a vision with working with startups, and also, frankly, to attract startups, because, as you all know, even 4 years ago, there were a huge number of corporates who were desperate to work with startups. All sorts of people doing very ill-advised things, often at great expense at conferences, promising startups the world, organising events badly, not giving them the funding they were promised. So the core tenet of Unilever Foundry was always, we will treat the startups well. They're giving us innovation, they're giving us their MVP, and we're giving them the scale through Unilever brands. So our job was to get that story out there. And our other job was, as well as helping with some strategy, was to prepare the startup so that they pitched as well as they could do, which was a really interesting process. So 3 or so years ago, we did a lot of that because a lot of startups were really bad at understanding what a marketing director or a big corporate wanted. Primarily, you would meet the two founders of a startup and they would be a very techie person, and then maybe someone who would talk about growth hacking, which is one of my least favourite terms ever. It's performance marketing. It just got reimagined by people in Silicon Valley who don't think they do marketing. And they would come to you with long decks with very little kind of pithy statements in it. Very rarely told you what they did before slide 40, and we would coach them brutally to say, you have 5 minutes to pitch, and here are 5 questions you have to answer, and if you don't answer them, you will be at disadvantage to the other people who are pitching. And so we spent 2 years doing the external marketing of Foundry and helping them build the brand, so it was easier to work with startups, so they had less rejection from startups, and so that other people understood the benefits of Foundry working with external innovators, both internally and externally. And then the other bit was really, I guess, trying to serve the startups as best we could. So Foundry did all sorts of things like mentoring programs from very senior people at Unilever, us doing coaching. They had specialist scouts who were there to engage with the startups to find the right ones, but also to explain the story to them. So I would say there are very few other corporates that have put that level of time, effort, emotional commitment and money into working with them. I think there's people like Wyra or Barclays with Techstars have done it, and that pays off because a lot of startups have a reasonably good impression of Unilever because of it, and people within the wider industry do as well. So it was a lot of hard work, a lot of fun, and I like to think we made a good contribution to kind of making startups less suspicious about corporates.
So do you think that effort, which is admirable, has moved the needle for Unilever in terms of their marketing?
I think in terms of marketing, it has. I've seen them make investments in startups that they've worked with that have gone on to be very successful.
Okay.
Like their name totally escapes me. What are they called?
We'll come back to it.
Olapic.
Right, okay. Right. So for people who don't know,
Olapic are simply basically a startup that will allow you to search around a keyword or hashtag on social. So if you're a brand so let's use a trainer brand because we were talking about trainers earlier. If you're Adidas, you want to know what people are saying about your trainers, you would search around it. You would see what people are saying, and then Olapic would identify the people who are influencers automatically contact them and ask whether the words they're saying or the videos they've made or the images they've created around your brand could be used for other social media marketing purposes or even for offline marketing. So it basically aggregates chat around your brand and then pulls out the people who are influential and their content and allows you to include that into your marketing. So that was a brand that Unilever Foundry worked with for a long time. Unilever Ventures, which is like a sister bit of Unilever, invested in them. Lots of Unilever brands had good success working with them, and then Unilever Ventures made money from the exit that they had with them. So that for me is a really good example of Unilever making commercial and also kind of creative and marketing benefit from working with the startup community.
Because I went to an onboarding at Google Campus the other day. I thought, well, I'm not going to work here forever, so I need somewhere else to sit, basically. And there was an onboarding, and they do one of these a week, and there was like about 200 people in this room.
Wow.
I was like, my God, it was quite humbling. And they're like, yeah, Google got all these services, you can do all these things, it's really cool. Oh yeah, but 9 out of 10 startups fail.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy, right? Like, why are people so excited, or why are marketers, so excited about startups when 9 out of 10 of them are they're not going to exist?
It's a good question. I think because, so from a marketer's point of view, you want to find the 1 in 10 that's going to make a massive splash and could be really successful before your competitors do. I think there's enough. So whether it's right or not, there is an expectation that your competitors are talking to startups in a more fundamental way than you are. In practice, there are still lots of brands and lots of corporates that really struggle with understanding how to make the most out of that relationship, and there's still a lot of kind of tech tourism or startup kind of, pony shows, as we used to call them, where you'll get 3 startups turn up and they'll be asked to pitch, and it's like they're dancing on a stage, and then nothing will happen. But I think the other corporates are frightened that their competitors in the market will be meeting that one startup that will turn into Instagram, or turn into a startup that will give them a much better way of engaging with influencers or generating UGC. So I think it's become a way for them to get market advantage. So yes, they might meet 10 startups and 9 of them will fail, but they hope that if they meet enough and they're guided through that process well enough, that they'll meet the one that will make a big difference to their business.
I guess, and I don't mean to sound like an arsehole here, but if you use the example of Instagram, like if a marketing startup's that good, then they're not going to commit to working with just Bovril, are they?
No.
I don't know, Bovril's my favourite brand of the day. Yeah. But for Instagram, the first brand to advertise on Instagram isn't the biggest brand in the world. I mean, God knows who that is. It's probably like a gambling site or something.
Yeah, or or a local San Franciscan bagel company.
yeah, sure that's what it is. But as a marketing person, how important is it to be first with Olympic or whoever it is?
I think we thought about this a lot. So I think commercially, it's probably less important to be first, because I think you could probably be the 10th person or corporate to work with a startup and develop your best practice and your learning quickly enough that you understand how to use that platform well enough, being 6 months in afterwards, that you get just as much commercial advantage. For me, it's the softer benefits that are important. I think that people who work for big corporations are excited, or certain types of people who work for those corporations are excited about new businesses and new ways of doing stuff. And so for me, it's a kind of a retention and a staff development strategy to make sure that you're exposing people to external thinking. If you think about, you worked in a creative agency, and part of your job, similar to mine, was to inspire people who, on the face of it, were already very creative people who had lots of other cultural inputs. But inspiring people with new ways of doing stuff and new people and new thinking just makes your mind more nimble and makes the company you work for more nimble. And I think a lot of corporates get that. And so I think it's the softer. Certainly, we saw. From a foundry perspective, certainly anecdotally, we met people at Unilever who said one of the things that swayed me from working for one of Unilever's competitors was the fact that they felt progressive because of the PR that was out there around the way that foundry worked. So ultimately it comes down to how well those programs of engagement are managed and how quickly working with a really new business goes to being business as usual. I definitely agree if you keep working with a new type of business every week and you don't double down on some of them and you don't take some of those learnings and spread it to the rest of the business, you fall into the trap of any innovation team does, is that you learn a lot, but the 95% of the rest of the people never do.
But isn't there a tension there, and this is not a criticism, but I've never thought about this before, despite being in the space for a while, is that if the main benefits of the software ones like retention, staff development, and absolutely, I think I've felt that and been around that. But the poor startups, man, they're like, you're only here to make Bobby in accounts not go and work for Mars. It's crushing.
Yes. No. And I think that's really so. I think, and that's one of the reasons why you've got to get your model of engagement right from a startup's perspective. So, Unilever Foundry's model was there will be a brief that the brand has agreed and put money behind, so it's a proper brief. We all know, as agency people, sometimes clients think it's hilarious to go out and meet a bunch of people without there being a brief or a budget. So part of the Foundry team's job was to make sure that the brand had a brief, had money, were committed to developing something. The second bit then was you go through a pitch process and a winner is chosen. And when the winner is chosen, they sign a contract and they get paid to do a trial. So they get money, they get the Unilever brand, and they get access to the huge, volumes, obviously, and reach that volumes of consumers and the kind of marketing reach that Unilever's got. And even the people that didn't win were given feedback and were also, at some point, because they were part of the pitch process, were given coaching from a while was from us about how to pitch better to marketing people. So if you think about the way agencies are treated when they pitch, whenever we pitched, we were guaranteed, not necessarily paid to pitch, but if you were guaranteed that there was a brief and that someone had read it, I'm going to get in trouble now. My career as an agency person is hanging by a thread. But you know where I'm going. The level of vetting was very thorough, and everyone got good feedback. We tried to make sure that everyone got good feedback. There will be a startup out there going, I got terrible, but it's like the endeavour was there to make it as beneficial for the startup to be part of that whole experience as it was for the marketing person. For 2 years we took 50 startups to Cannes. The level of effort in that, not just because Cannes during the Cannes Lion Festival is not the cheapest place to stay in the world. It was more, it's facilitating people meeting, hosting events where those startups could meet other people from Unilever, but other corporates. There was a lot of commitment made to make sure that people understood that, yes, Unilever wanted innovation for all sorts of reasons, but there was also a to use that term that I'm not overly fond of, a value exchange back for the startup.
It reminded me when you were talking, going back to my enrolling in Google Campus experience. At the end of the Google Campus experience, I went to the organiser and said, "That was a great event. Thought you presented that really well. I've just got a query because I run an event. Could I be back? And I would like to talk to. I don't know if you've got any advertising startups." And she's like, "Oh Jesus Christ!" It's just pouring out of every crevice. You open the drawer and there's an ad tech business there. It's quite terrifying for obvious reasons. But anyway, so quick right angle turn into some get to know you questions. Although that we have got to know you clearly. So quick answers. What is the marketing book you recommend the most often?
So I'm a bit promiscuous with marketing books in that it's normally the last one that I've just read. However, the one that's left the biggest impact over me over the last 6 months is, I think it's the full title is The Big Four by Scott Galloway.
Okay,
I love Scott Galloway. Scott Galloway is one of those people who, for those who don't know, teaches marketing
NYU.
at NYU, had a business called L2 which benchmarked marketing for people. Basically, he's a pithy, sarcastic, abrasive New Yorker who's very rich, so therefore he gets to say what he likes about who he likes. And in that book, he trains his sites on GAFA, or Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, as people who don't work in marketing call them. I said to my wife, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago or something about she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm looking at the impact of GAFA on marketing," and she just shook her head at me and went, "I assume you don't mean gaffer tape." But, that's a whole different type of podcast.
And for people who can't be asked to read the book, what's the main takeout from that?
Essentially, that they have a lot of influence, and that they should, if they don't want to be regulated, they do need to start looking in the mirror and being a bit more introspective. It's interesting, that book was written 6 months or so ago, and fast forward now, Facebook is running ads saying fake news is not our friends. There is an element of mea culpa around Mark Zuckerberg's kind of behaviour at the moment, saying, yes, we did help Trump win the election. Yes, we did do some things that, although perfectly legal, maybe we're not as happy about as we were. And all throughout that book, Scott Galloway takes the four big tech companies slightly to task for not understanding that their technology has a huge impact on society and the people within it.
And I watched his annual talk at whatever, Germany or somewhere.
Yeah.
And every time I watch his annual video, I don't know what it's called, but if you Google Scott Galloway's, presentation, he kind of like pulls the curtain back and reveals like how awful it is, the way that the big four act.
Yeah.
And I always think, oh my God, they're terrible. And then I'll just go home and order something on Amazon on my phone.
Whilst chatting to your mates on Facebook. Yeah.
And so I'm interested to know how you've read the whole book versus me just watching a 20-minute talk. How has that changed the way that you've worked or the way that you see things?
It's hard. So the really good example is Facebook. So I am aware that I probably spend a lot of my time thumbing through Facebook newsfeed, and that probably I could be reading a book, spending more time with my kids, cooking, going to the gym, that type of stuff. But at the same time, I help run a football club for my 2 daughters, and what really struck me was when I started doing that was every single communication for that club, be that getting sponsors, putting news stories out, putting pictures of the kids training, recruiting a dog mascot, which is one of my silly marketing ideas, just going down a tree, let me tell you, through to contacting parents about matches, happen on Facebook or WhatsApp. And so it's very easy to kind of in the abstract go, spend too much time on my mobile, the platforms have too much influence, but at the same time, one of the things I'm really passionate about in my life is helping that football club do well, and every single tool I use to do that is Facebook or WhatsApp. Or when we were ordering stuff for the fun day we did in the summer, all of the things we'd forgotten were all ordered on my Amazon Prime account and arrived the next day, 2 hours before the fun day. So they are convenient, pervasive utilities that people use all of the time. And it's very hard to break the influence that they have on you, even if you worry about how much time you spend on them.
I wonder what Scott Galloway does. How does he organise his kids'
I don't know. He's probably got someone who does that for him.
Yeah.
You should get Scott Galloway as a podcast guest.
Yeah. Okay, Scott, if you're listening. Okay, so slightly different question. If you had a digital media budget of £10 million to get any message out there, what would it be? And don't say your kid's next big football team game.
No, it would be unashamedly political. I would look at all of the lessons. If you had Tracy Fellows on next week, she may have had an opinion on this as well. But I would look at all of the lessons that we in the liberal, slightly centre of left community have learned about how Trump and the Vote Leave campaign gamed social media to get messages to people. So I am pro-Brexit and anti-Trump. But I think my general comment out of that is that I'd use it to get messages out there to change the world, having seen the lessons that people who change the world, in my view, not for the better, but people listening may completely disagree. I think we've been, in some ways, if you abstract your political preferences, we have been given two brilliant marketing case studies about how to dance right on the line of the grey area of digital marketing, by Vote Leave and by Trump. And we should use that to our advantage to try and get the things that we want to happen in the world.
So
if you have sponsors on this, some of them will be leaving.
So what would that say? Like, what would be on that billboard? Or would it be like a kind of John Lewis type rambling ad on the tube?
Never knowingly undersold. You won't get £350 million a week for the NHS.
Okay, so despite this kind of litany of successes, what has been your biggest work failure that has set you up for success?
Do you know what? My biggest work failure was probably, because ordinarily you think about that and you go, what's the project that went wrong? I actually think, so I worked for an agency called Hyper Happen a long time ago, when my now 10-year-old daughter was one. In fact, she joined when my wife was pregnant. It's a very smart agency full of ex-media strategists run by two guys who I still have a lot of time for. But I was completely wrong for that agency and they were completely wrong for me. And it took 14 or 15 months for me to realise that and then find a way out. I learned quite a lot from that process. One is I started to doubt whether I was good at the job that I think I thought up to that point I was good at. And so I'd been quite junior, well, not junior. I'd been one of those kind of more junior people in agencies where people have kind of gone, my God, isn't he mature for his age, or isn't he bang well above his weight from a work perspective? Or we give him all of the shitty projects to do and he manages to deliver them. And then I arrived in this agency trying to run production without really understanding how to do some of the jobs they wanted me to do, in an agency that was entirely run by people who'd come from media agencies and didn't understand how creative worked and didn't understand how production worked. And I wasn't skilled enough or experienced enough to define that role well enough. And so it ended up in me needing to leave. And it taught me to, firstly, be clear about what I was good at and to stick up for myself when I thought I was doing the right thing, but hold my hands up when I was doing the wrong thing. And just generally taught me to kind of be a bit more considered about the roles I took and a bit better at saying no. So Tom and Brad, if you're listening, I think it was as painful for me to work for you as it was for you to have me around, but you actually taught me quite a lot.
So when you say you've got a lot of time for them, you only communicate with them through podcasts.
I actually saw Tom. Tom's a friend of a friend from university. I saw him at one of those things people in their sort of late 30s do when they have kids, where they all go to a big house in Devon and realise that having parties with kids around is slightly painful. I saw him a year ago. But yeah, no, it was a painful but very necessary learning experience, that agency.
Oh, it's the painful, expensive lessons are the one that you remember, aren't they? Unfortunately. Yeah. So, in terms of your career, what has been the best investment of time, energy, or money that you've made?
So in as a kind of a general answer to that question would be it's a time investment, and it's the time investment of not going home at 6:30 or 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending on when your day job finishes, and making yourself go to events, come and do podcasts, go and listen to people talk about stuff that's got nothing to do with your day job, go to events where you're the only person there and you know that you're unlikely to bump into anyone you know, or latterly help put those events on. Not just because I do an innovation role and part of my job is to meet new people, but just generally I think being curious about the world around you requires a time commitment, and it means you've got to sacrifice a night a week where you're not at the pub, or you might not get home as early as you want to, or you have to shuffle other stuff around. I think curious people in our industry were the people that will stay in it the longest, and the world's going to change quite significantly, I think, from an agency perspective, but also artificial intelligence entering creative industries, which is, I know, something that you are investigating quite deeply. I think people who stay curious and nurture their creativity by building up networks and different associations in their brain will be more successful. So investing time in networking is my big kind of my big thing.
So when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, how do you get back on track?
Probably two answers to this question. One is I am lucky, although sometimes the commute's painful, to live by the sea. This is a classic. If I'm working from home, I will walk to the end of my road and have a stroll along the sea and realise the insignificance of humanity. It's that classic staring into sea thing. And then more prosaically, because most of the time I do work from the office, which is very traditional, I think that asking other people, telling other people you've got stuck, and saying this is where I'm trying to get to with this deck or this presentation or this project or this idea, is one of the really lovely things about working in the type of businesses that we work in, is that the whole point is you go, I've got 2/3 of the way through this problem, but I can't do it on my own anymore. Can we have a chat? And I'm lucky that I work with people who will go, oh, I'll stop what I'm doing for half an hour and come and have a coffee with you and have a chat, or I can pick up the phone or get on Twitter and ping people in Innovation Social or people I used to work for, or just generally go, has anyone got a better answer to something than I've come up with?
That's so interesting to hear you say that, because I hear it said so often at bloody offices, meetings, you can't do any work for more than 5 minutes. And I'll say that more than anyone. Like, you can't focus on anything. It's too distracting. There's like there's Twitter's pinging off, or people come and talk to me in the office when I'm trying to do stuff. But you've nailed it exactly. Like, I never thought about it in those terms, that you get stuck and you go, I'm going to make a cup of tea, and you moan on so and so from strategy and go, oh man, I'm really stuck on this thing, and that's it. You solve the problem by ruining other people's concentration.
Yeah, I think. Depending on the task, if your task is trying to come up with something new, and that could be actually doing a piece of creative work, or it could be trying to find a way around a problem, or it could be trying to run a structure or workshop. Yes, there's a bunch of stuff you can do based on your experience and research, and yes, writing decks is easier if the guy that sits next to you is not whinging about the fact that his football team lost, or like how expensive kids are, or the fact that his girlfriend's dumped him, or the fact that the guy around the corner put normal milk instead of oat milk in his latte. These are all reference points that only a certain group of people will get. Yeah. However, if you try to do anything other than write something solidly or do loads of calls at home, and you want someone to remind you what that great bit of work that another agency did was, or that startup you met, or that quote, asking your mates where you live who do normal jobs met with blank stares, like there's no one to help you. And I think that's what's interesting about this slight desire for everyone to work from home or have these sort of pods where you're separated from everyone, is that actually bumping into someone and asking them those questions is kind of what's lovely about the industry we work in. It's kind of why the premise of co-working exists, because in reality, if it wasn't good to bump into other people and talk to them, then you wouldn't be able to sell people the fact that they could have a desk for 600 quid a month next to someone else, because that would be a hard sell if there wasn't some element of you bumping into other people with ideas or kind of serendipity that made sense to the human brain. We are social animals. Doing that other thing that people in advertising do, where they co-opt bits of anthropology or psychology to back up a point, but I think we're meant to speak to other people, not ignore them.
But yet, speaking to people and interrupting each other is what annoys us the most. Interesting tension. Yeah. So your shiny new object is voice.
Yeah. Yes.
Brilliant. So I have been waiting 12 episodes to talk about a voice. So just for the sake of my own perspective on it, so I was innovation director with Social, and me and Matt Payne got an Amazon Echo, and we had this amazing experience of saying, Alexa, what's the time? And then it just responded and told me the time straight away. And that was like one of the most exciting things that had happened to me in years, that like I could talk to a bit of technology and it would come back. I've since completely fallen out of love with voice. So I'm dead keen to hear why you're excited about it and what you're doing with it.
So I think, so I thought about, so your question obviously when guests come on this podcast is what's the one technology-driven trend or piece of technology you're really excited about? And look, everyone knows the Gartner hype cycle. There's all these like bits of technology.
Do they? I think there's people listening to this that have no idea what you're talking about.
Gartner hype cycle is a sort of a line that's drawn which goes sort of a bit up and down and wavy, and there are different bits of that cycle that technology inhabit. So you have the bit where the line goes up and everyone's excited where a new technology comes out, and typically that's where agencies do very PR-led things. So the classic 3D chocolate printed drone brief where you try and cram as many bits of utterly pointless technology into something that will win you an award at Cannes. And then when you've done, there's nothing wrong with Cannes, it's a lovely place. When you've done that thing, then you realise that there has not been very much consumer adoption of the technology that you want to push, or if there has, they don't really understand how to use it, and then you get into what I believe is called the trough of disillusionment, where people go, oh, that VR, AR, voice, internet thing's a load of rubbish, we're going to go and do something else. And then it starts to climb back out as people... So two things happen. Either the technology then flatlines and goes away, like 3D TV, or... it starts to pick up some traction with normal people with real use cases and get bought, and then suddenly you have a technology base that you can do interesting things with from utility through to marketing. And I guess for me, if you look at all of the technologies that are out there, so VR, AR, blockchain, I don't include AI as a technology because I think it's an underpinning thing, but if you look at blockchain, VR, AR and voice, it's the one that real consumers are actually buying. So I think there's some stats knocking around at the moment. I think 10% of UK households have got some sort of smart assistant. That's everything from a Google Home or an Amazon Echo to a new Sonos, which has got that thing built in. And in terms of globally, the growth of smart speakers is more aggressive than the growth of the smartphone was at a similar time in that product's life cycle. That doesn't mean that this technology is definitely going to succeed, but if you look at the other things that we're supposed to be excited about doing the jobs that we do, and things like VR and AR, we're all walking around with a smartphone. I really genuinely have yet to see people, other than for a while with Pokemon Go, get their phones out to do augmented things. We've got Google Maps on our phone, and there are versions of Google Maps that allow you to do augmented things. I still don't see people routinely using AR other than things like Snapchat filters and kind of lenses on Facebook. Whereas I know real people who have real jobs in the real world, who have smart speakers who ask them to do things like turn their heating on with Hive or a Nest, or ask them whether their train's going to be late. Or a friend of mine built an Alexa skill for his school to find out what there was for lunch that day, which is a key. I know you've just had a kid. When that kid gets to a certain age and they become fussy about food, knowing what's for school dinners at 7 a.m. saves you trying to find a PDF, or saves you sending them to school disappointed because it's macaroni cheese and they hate cheese and pasta. And so people are using it for useful things in a way that they just aren't with VR and AR. And I think that creates a huge opportunity for brands. I think it's got a magic in it that is quite accessible. So your story about talking to Alexa and saying, what's the time? It reminds you of those kind of science fiction programs that you got excited about as a kid, but in a way that's actually been made fairly accessible. I think the cheapest Amazon smart speaker is like 30 quid. And so they aren't like 250 quid VR headsets made for gamers, or weird clumsy apps that you have to remember to download and get out. They are things, then there's privacy and security concerns which we can talk about, but I think the potential, and that's really what I look for, is the potential of voice is really big. And I think it opens up a whole bunch of interesting questions for brands about how they're represented in what is a brand new interface.
So taking the position of a skeptical marketer, so assuming everything you say is correct, what is the opportunity for a brand today in voice?
So I think at the moment, an opportunity for a marketer is to start to experiment and learn what works and what doesn't work. And I mean that from two perspectives. What's really interesting about voice is that it's incredibly easy to build a skill. So it was fairly easy to build an app, but you sort of needed an app developer or your digital agency to get their head around it. You can get a hold of software, not the only one, but we've experimented with Storyline that allows you to put a simple decision tree together, record some audio on a microphone like you're recording this podcast on, splice it together, and a day later have a functioning Alexa skill or Echo skill that the Amazon team can look at and decide whether they want to publish into the store. So the barrier, so that there's a couple of things. Barrier for entry is obviously very low, so there's a load of total crap on it. Like there are about 150,000 fart Alexa skills, and there's all sorts of weird stuff on there. But if we're telling marketers to experiment more and to do stuff more quickly, there is no easier technology for them to experiment with voice, and there's also no more natural interface for humans than to talk. So I think that's where there's just learnings about if you're a brand that doesn't have a celebrity voice behind it, what does your brand sound like when all it's got is old-fashioned copywriting and the voice of an actor or an actress to translate it? I think are questions that marketeers could ask themselves and experiment with, and it might help them crack other problems or solve other more general marketing problems. I do think if you're niche marketer, there are revenue generation opportunities. So there are people making revenue out of choose your own adventure games. There are people making revenue out of niche content, like very kind of niche cookery skills. I've not seen mass brands monetize, but if you look at Lego, are doing all sorts of really interesting experimentation with a Duplo skill that gives the child who's making something extra things for their imagination to kind of experiment with a Lego brick. At some point, if they get enough traction, you could see that they would sell that as a digital service over and above the physical bricks. So I think for me, because the barrier of entry is so low and the interface is natural and people actually have got the tools, I think experimenting is not a huge distraction, because I think there really could be some ways to make money and to develop your brand.
So I get that, low barrier to entry, low cost, why not? But the question was, what is the opportunity? So well, it's really quite nice to be an ex-innovation director, hammering someone who has to do this for a living. This is all just sport. But what's the opportunity for a brand? Like experimentation, yes. Voice is going to be massive, yes. At some point, it'll be way more ubiquitous. You'll buy a house with a voice OS. Do you want it to be Siri, Cortana, or whatever? I 100% believe in the future of voice and where it's going to get to. But what's a brand going to do now with voice? Given that I'm sure that was it 10% of this voice assistants, but how many of those 10% of people are using a skill outside of utilitarian skills like where's my car, or like when's my train, or what's the news, or what's the weather, or turn my living room temperature to like a few more degrees. So if you're you're Bovril, what are you?
Bovril, you like Bovril. So I think you've helped me answer my question. I think in the way early days of social, and you all know this, working for We Are Social, everyone wanted a Facebook community and to be active on Twitter, and then people started to say flippantly, do I want a social relationship with my toothpaste? And the answer is no. So I don't think that voice has got a place for every brand. So I think firstly it's a complementary. I don't think anyone who, even the most ardent of kind of voice drum beaters, would say that voice is going to replace every other interface. It feels like it's another one of those marketing touch points. So I think the first thing is it relevant for my brand to produce a skill, either because I can provide utility. So if you're British Gas and Hive, your Alexa skill, which I use every single day, is so inherent to your brand over Nest or another startup that will come along that it's part of your business model, because without it, some people will choose your product over other people's. So for some brands it's completely core. If you're a content brand, there's, I think it's becoming core. I think it's NPR, which is the sort of the US equivalent of the BBC, have just hired like 15 people to make voice only content, because the shift between video news consumption on voice is one of the key things that people use it for. They get their daily whatever they call flash briefings from the Echo, and the Google Home has a similar thing. So if you're into content or utility, then I think it's becoming another channel you have to that is core to your product and brand development. Then you get into brands where it's kind of might sort of push some sort of either awareness or preference. So premium car brands that let you do things to their car that sits on top of the app that they built. I think that's when you start to get a bit spurious, like locking your car using your voice feels a bit like an innovation director came up with that as something to win a can award. Yeah. But I think it's like all technology. You've got to ask yourself, what role does my brand have to play with this piece of technology? If you jump through that hurdle, then it's like, what am I doing it for? Awareness, preference, is it core to my product, or is it something that might drive revenue? The really interesting thing, and I remember this from doing a little bit of work with them at one stage, is that you've got to remember that Lego looked at Minecraft a while ago and said it wasn't the right investment for them to make or the right thing for them to be in, because Lego was always about physical play. And I bet you now Lego wish that they had made more of an investment into digital play and found a way to expand their brand and expand what they believe their brand was about, to incorporate digital play in time that they could have made their own version of Minecraft or even acquired it. So I think it's about working out whether the core of your brand purpose or your product set can be changed enough, or is flexible enough, or has room for you to slightly expand consumers' understanding of it so that it can incorporate a new channel. I also would say I reckon 70% of brands will make something slightly half-hearted that is of no contribution to the world, but that's probably true for TV advertising.
That's very, very generous.
But it's very
30% of brands very changing the world through it.
So let's be realistic and say 90% of brands who do anything on Facebook, social, TV, print, the products we see in our supermarket aren't making a useful, tangible contribution to the world. But apart from and obviously all of the 10% who do are all Karmarama clients. But on a serious note, I just think it's like anything. It's like all new channels will be flooded by weird use cases and people experimenting and people wanting to be be able to write blogs or do talks or go to conferences about it. But that 10% of brands who crack it will find a real revenue generator or brand generating way of using a new channel. And I do think it's slightly flippant, and it's a classic innovation thing to say, but if you don't start to experiment with that stuff, then you will lose people in your team to other brands who are, just because people want to do new stuff, and you will have to try and claw back the advantage that you've lost through understanding or not being on that channel when it started. And so I think it's being very aware of who you are as a brand and what your product is and whether you fit, and then if it is designing pilots and experimentation well. And I think voice is like any other channel from an innovation point of view. You've got to work out. I'm a bit dubious of people who say you don't need a strategy for a new channel. You should just try loads of mad shit. You do need a strategy for trying to understand what you're trying to learn, because otherwise you just do a bunch of stuff in a new channel. It sort of doesn't work. You can't justify it to your boss, or you can't get more budget, and then it withers. And then 2 years later, one of your competitors done something amazing and got to somewhere you might have got to.
Yeah, it reminds me of an experience I had recently. I was in, weirdly, in the makeup department of some, department store or something, and I'm making a mess of this, but there was a whole makeup line that had been created by a YouTuber.
Yeah.
I don't know who it was. I'm sure there's hundreds of them. But it just reminded me of a meeting I had when I worked at Sky years ago, and I had a meeting with like L'Oreal, and I was like, social media is going to be a really big thing, and they're like, do me a favour. We're not going to give you the £3.50 I was begging them to spend on like a Twitter experiment or something. Yeah. And it's true, that's what will happen, that if you don't bet on the right thing, then they basically handed over a huge chunk to that whoever that person is.
Yeah, exactly. And also I just think there's something fundamental about it. So VR is a VR, and I don't pick on VR. I have a VR headset at home, and my kids quite like it. But VR is a weird artificial thing where you strap something on your head, and you have to. People have counterbalanced the fact that it makes you sick, and they've made content for it, and you think, oh my god, this is really complicated. Voice is like the most. You put an Alexa in front of someone who's 80 and go ask it a question. Once they get over their nervousness, they go, Alexa, what's the time? And they goes, it's 7:32, and they go, fuck, that's great. As opposed to put this VR headset on and maybe you'll feel sick, and maybe you won't realise that a tour around a brewery in VR is not what this technology was made for.
Right, Lawrence, I'm going to have to wrap up, so I'm just going to go over some of the things you talked about. So it was genuinely fascinating to hear about what you actually do for a living after spending about 6 years trying to guess. You're working with Facebook and the big platforms trying to work out what's going to happen, and also mainly the brilliant work you've done with Foundry. And one of the things that I'm really happy that you've been able to talk about on this podcast was the idea of treating startups right, making sure there is an opportunity, there's a brief, there's opportunity to get in front of the client. It's not this tech tourism or these pony shows, and I think that's really important. But on the flip side of that, also recognizing that often the role of innovation really is to help teams become closer, stop people leaving, to give people a sense of purpose and excitement and inspiration. But there is actually a middle ground where internal teams can get excited and develop, but also startups can prosper. He talks about the Olympic story, and I just think there's a real authenticity to the way that you talk about that. And I know there are a bunch of startups out there who have definitely a better space because of the work you've done with them, and I think that should be absolutely applauded. Where do we get to next? Oh yeah, the getting to know you questions. You're a big Scott Galloway fan, as am I. That your 10 million quid poster would be to use Trump-esque tactics on social to get the things we want, which would just be the most ridiculous billboard of all time. And one thing very close to my heart is the idea that the best investment you've made of your time is going to stuff after work. Don't be that person that goes home at 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever. Go to events, invest your time. And I think that the quote I'll probably use in the write-up of this is, being curious about the world requires a time commitment, and it does. It's not something you sort of dip in and out of. And then we had an interesting discussion about how, when you get stuck, it's one of the things you like about agencies is you can go and talk to someone, you can speak to someone by the water cooler or wherever else, and the great thing about being a knowledge worker is you're around other knowledge workers that can help you kind of solve these problems and really put a positive spin on co-working. And then we started talking about voice, and as is often the way, there's the stats about how prevalent they are. 10% of voice assistants in UK homes, and the adoption of smart speakers is faster than mobiles were at the same period, which is fascinating. And if you want to order, you want to know what your school dinner is, you can ask Alexa. And I think that the sentence you said that I thought was quite lovely was, there's a magic in voice, and that it's quite accessible, and it's an affordable technology, and that brands should think about how easy it is to make a skill, like the investment of actually getting something live to test it with a target market or a target audience is pretty low, versus building a website or building an app or building a VR experience. And as much as you're excited about it, the voice doesn't necessarily have a place for every brand. And I really love this sentence you said that what right does my brand have to use this technology? And if you can get past that question, then start asking, what do you want to learn and what do you want to get out of this? How are we going to prove this is useful? Because if you do get a new technology like voice right, you have the opportunity to inspire and retain your staff, but also give your brand an advantage far above and beyond their competitors. So if people want to stay in touch with you, what would you like them to do?
I think the best place to stay in touch with me is probably at Lawrence Webber on Twitter.
Right.
That's the place where you will find me retweeting stuff and
Innovation
ranting.
Social?
Innovation Social, get hold of us on at Innovation Soc, or to be honest, get hold of me on Twitter. And we can tell you more about Innovation Social. We do have a website, which I think is innovationsocial.io, which has a list of people who are in the family and the events we do. And our next meetup is in September. So, yeah, feel free to contact me on Twitter.
Do you have an Alexa skill?
No, but we should have an
What would
Alexa
it do?
skill. So those of you listening to this podcast know Nadia Powell. It would just be Nadia Powell screaming at you. It'd be a Nadia Powell alarm clock. That's what the Innovation
Alexa,
Social...
what is Nadia doing right now? Fuck off.
Yeah, exactly. It would just be Nadia swearing in a high-pitched voice, which to some of you will be hilarious and others of you will go, I wish you hadn't answered that question.
Let's leave it there. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.